answer for you, of course. Yeah, like after spending a nice evening with like many of you yesterday, I'd like to introduce you to the second day of our symposium, which will be dedicated to the topic of internationalizing project-based learning. Does it make sense? Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? And of course, our like the part where everything will flow together, hopefully. I'm super confident it will after our discussion yesterday. It's like after the lunch break. Before lunch break, we have input. We have another keynote, our second keynote, and we will have a slot on funding possibilities. Because what is innovative pedagogy without the appropriate funding opportunities? And there will be some possibilities will be discussed. But to begin with, it's my pleasure to invite Eva Haug from Amsterdam here, join me, our second keynote speaker. She will address the topic of COIL, collaborative online international learning and project-based learning. How do we get students to collaborate online? That's like the extension of the talk's title. Eva works as an educational advisor for curriculum, internationalization, and COIL virtual exchange at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. She's a research fellow at the University of the Free State, South Africa, elected member of the EAIE steering group for internationalization at home since 2019, affiliated developer and trainer with Florida International University in Miami, USA, and yeah, well known for professional development and capacity building for COIL and curriculum internationalization. There would be much more to say, but I would stop here.
Quite enough.
Okay, good. And I'm especially happy that you're here because more recently in our department we became like interested in COIL, the COIL format. It's, many of you know, well established in the US, in the early 2000s, like with the variant of virtual exchange, how to organize virtual exchange. But so far in Germany, there are just few universities who are into COIL, who work with COIL, and we had just before we invited you this ongoing discussion about this format and dug into the matter. So I also must say, before this backdrop, I'm myself really interested and curious what you have to tell us today, and yeah, it's all yours. Please, you can either use this or just speak here, whatever.
I'll try to stay here then. Well, thank you, everybody. I got up very early this morning at 3. We got into the car at 4. So if I stumble over my words, it's because part of me is not really awake. I started to waken up a little bit at 7:30 when finally it was a little bit more light. So thank you so much for the invitation, but also for the lovely introduction. Anything I'm going to say is probably going to sound way too enthusiastic because I'm a real believer. I've been doing COIL actively since 2014. At least that's when we started calling it COIL in my university. I've been doing something similar, and you may be doing something similar. And after my presentation, you will say, oh, I mean, we do that, but we call it something else. So that might happen as well. We've been doing something similar earlier, and the thing that we used to do at our university is now called a blended intensive program, which is funded by Erasmus. It's one of the Erasmus-funded schemes. So I'm curious also to hear. I don't think, because I thought I have an hour, but I would like to leave ample time for questions and discussion, and if that's okay with you. But how much time maximum do I have? Doesn't matter? Half an hour. Okay. I forgot my phone, so if somebody could give me or is there a clock somewhere so I can keep track? On the, no. So anyway, so I'm going to do it blind, and you'll tell me if I'm going on for too long. This one. So in preparation, I thought, do I know enough about project-based learning? Let me just Google it a little bit and see what comes up. And these two quotes came up that I liked. The project is the vehicle for teaching the knowledge and the skills that the students need. I like that, the idea of a project being a vehicle. And so instead of the academic being the one with all the knowledge, it's the project, it's the doing. And I've been looking for correlation between COIL and COIL Virtual Exchange and project-based learning. So I thought, well, that's something we have in common. And then also it says project-based learning requires critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication. I thought, well, COIL requires all of that. So there's a lot that these two have in common. So I'd like to share with you some ideas where I think they are not so different. They're both ways of looking at how do we educate. The focus with COIL is on the international or intercultural. This is what you've been doing yesterday and you're doing today. So you know more about this, the project-based learning, than I do, right? So I'm going to look for, or try to, sorry, you want me to show the image? I saw people trying to take a picture. I just Googled it, that's on the internet. But it's a very nice one, I must say. So one of the things that popped up with project-based learning, that it requires a challenging problem and authenticity. Now, not all COIL projects have always a real-life client and a real problem, but they do deal with, ideally, they deal with real-world issues and challenges. And so what you're trying to do is bring students together to think about, so if you know something and you know somewhere else in the world knows something else, what problem could you solve? Because we need these two perspectives to solve that problem. So many of the projects that we do in Amsterdam with COIL, but around the world as well, are connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And there we have 16 problems. The 17th is the collaboration between the goals. So very often what we do is we connect these global problems that have a local impact sometimes, or they have a local cause but a global effect. And so connecting the global with the local is something that we can do with a COIL project, because everybody has a local experience and they experience local problems. And very often in our universities, that's what we focus on. Whereas we cannot see the Sustainable Development Goals as not interconnected. Like we cannot solve, well, we saw, for example, we could not solve the COVID problem and the pandemic and the vaccine problem by ourselves. We needed the rest of the world. In the Netherlands, we have an abundance of water, right? We live below sea level, so we know a lot about dikes. But it's interesting to collaborate with a country where there's a shortage of water, because it's the same end of the same type of problem with a different sort of repercussion, right? So that's what we're trying to do with COIL projects as well. So very often what we do, and I'm going to show you some examples later on. One is of a same discipline project, but very often with COIL projects, we connect students from different disciplines. So we collaborate on a project, but we do it in an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way. And the other day when I used these words, we got into a whole discussion in Spanish about the difference between multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and trans, not the topic of this session. So what I mean is that students with different knowledges and different experiences at looking at a problem work together. That's what I mean for today. Also with project-based learning, it said that student voice and student choice is important, right? That students have a say in how they learn, how they approach this. So the same with COIL projects. In a COIL project, the academic really has a completely different role. They are more the guide on the side, right? They are a coach and a facilitator of the process. With a COIL project, the content is one thing, and the students work on something that has a content, but the process is equally a part of the learning. And the role of the academic is not so much a content specialist, but a process facilitator. They do know about the content, obviously, because they teach it, but they might not teach it to the other the students of the other group, because they may be a different discipline. So what they're doing is helping students navigate the challenges and the learning opportunities of working across discipline, across nationalities. But the students are in the lead. They need to schedule appointments. They need to figure out how shall we, approach this problem. What tools shall we use? So we give them guidance, obviously. We don't say, well, this is the problem, go solve it. We give them lots of help and structure, but still in between, they need to figure out how are we going to do this. And that connects to this point, which is about reflection, because I also saw in project-based learning, reflection and critique is also very important, equally so with COIL. If the process is important, reflection is essential. Right? Because the students are having an experience, and without reflecting upon the experience, they miss part of the learning. Now, to do that, it is important that you make the process of learning, the process of collaborating, part of the learning outcomes. And I think the same applies to project-based learning as well. So feedback is very much a part of team collaboration, often the cause of a lot of miscommunication and issues. And you can shy away from that, or you can embrace it as a learning opportunity, because people communicate differently across the world. And there will be misunderstandings and there will be issues. If you know anything about the Dutch, is that we're brutally honest and direct, right? So feedback from a Dutch person, from a Dutch student who is less nuanced than an adult, can come across really impolite, very harsh, right? Especially in writing. So learning how to navigate that, for the Dutch students to learn how to soften the message, and for other students to learn not to take it that literally, what we're saying, or to teach us maybe to soften that message, right? Those are important lessons. So feedback is part of the loop. The professor gives feedback, but the students also do a lot of peer feedback. So COIL, what it is. I'm going to talk now about something I really know a lot about, which is collaborative online international learning. So the focus of a COIL project, and the reason we call it COIL in Amsterdam, because virtual exchange is the umbrella term that is used for many modalities of online collaboration, often international online collaboration. That can be an intercultural dialogue, and that is sometimes also referred to as virtual exchange. Oh, thank you. Is it noticeable that I'm thirsty? Okay. So there's virtual exchange, there's telecollaboration, which often is more focused around language acquisition. There is teletandem or tandem learning. There's mirror classrooms or clase espejo, which is very popular in South America. Well, there's COIL and there's global classrooms, and then every university wants to invent its own name, right? So that because for the branding purposes, whatever, it makes doing research about it more and more difficult, because you need to figure out what do you mean by this type of learning. The Dutch Ministry of Education 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago started a subsidy whereby they give 15,000 euros for the development and the start of the implementation of a COIL project, but we are not allowed to call it COIL. We're supposed to give it a Dutch acronym, which is Virtual International Collaboration, but the C is an S in Dutch, which makes no sense because it's international. So none of our partners understand the acronym, but it's Dutch taxpayer money, so we have to use that term, right? So the Dutch Ministry of Education thought of another acronym, another way to call it, but we're all talking basically about the same thing. The reason we use COIL in Amsterdam is because we do almost all of our education is project-based. I'm in an institution, University of Applied Sciences, a Hochschule here in Germany, Universidad Tecnológica, sometimes in Spain, and all our research is applied and almost everything we do is project-based, right? So for us, the collaborative part is essential, it's critical. The peer-to-peer learning is how we learn, is how we teach. It's part of our DNA. So that to us made a lot of sense. It also forces us, it holds us accountable. What is really important, because if the project is about the teacher, the lecturer giving a lot of information and listening to another lecturer somewhere else in the world, that's not collaborative, right? The idea, so it's great, that's a great input, but then I always ask, so what will the students do? Because it's the student activity that is the key of the project. It's online, so you use digital media, digital tools to connect people, right? But because a lot of our work is done with the Global South, for me, it's not about fancy technology. This is great that you have this room, even if it sometimes doesn't work. But the majority of teachers don't have this. And then also the majority of the work that students do takes place outside. So they have phones. You should think of really what they do together and not how fancy the technology is. But you do need a connection. And that does create sometimes issues of accessibility. So we'll talk about that in a minute. It is international, but actually COIL can also be interdisciplinary or intercultural. So one of the biggest projects that I've been involved in for the last 4 years is in a project with South Africa, an Erasmus project. South Africa has 11 languages, many regions, many different cultures, all very distinct, one from the other. You can do a COIL project that's intercultural within the same country. The Netherlands is very small, so it is a little bit harder. In 2 hours, hour and a half, we're abroad, like in Belgium or in Germany. And so for us, the I is almost always international, also because nobody else speaks Dutch. So it's, it makes sense. But it can be within the same country, and you can do it, for example, interdisciplinary if you want to focus on sustainable development goals. And it's about learning. So the learning outcomes are key. What is the learning that you want students to do? So the most successful and maybe a success formula for COIL projects is connect study or credits to it and learning outcomes. Because if a student just does it for fun, you need a highly motivated student that even when it becomes hard and you want it to be hard, because learning is difficult, that they still stay motivated. We've done projects with partners where the students did not get any credits and they dropped out left and right. At the end, we had very few students left. So it is better to sort of give the effort that the students put in the merit that it deserves. So a project basically consists of three phases, let's call it that: an icebreaker, a collaboration, and a reflection. But here you see slightly more detailed. A COIL project can last as long as you want. Now, usually I recommend no longer than 8 weeks. It says 12 because, if some people want to try and do as much of a semester as possible. But a COIL is embedded into a course. And for us, for example, in my university, each semester is separated into 2 blocks. So we have teaching blocks of 10 weeks, basically 8 weeks of active teaching class. So it makes sense for us for a COIL project to be between 4 and 8 weeks. 6 really is a magic number. For us, 6 works really well because you need 1 week is, what are we doing? And then the second week is, we're doing an icebreaker. Then they're going to do research. First they do local research and they compare and they analyze the differences and the similarities. And that's also challenging for academics to think beyond just comparing. Because the comparison is, in a way, is easy. It's interesting, but that's an exchange. It's not a collaboration. Right? You say, this is the situation in my country, great. And this is the situation in my country. It's different, yeah. That's why we put them together. We knew it was different. But what can you do now that you know the differences? For example, I remember one of my very first COIL projects, we did something about Coca-Cola, about marketing with advertisement students and marketing students. So similar, so we looked at Coca-Cola ads, a campaign in the Netherlands where they talked about family and happiness. And family in the Netherlands was portrayed as 2 men with a child, right? And in the United States, family looked different, right? So that tells you something. And then, okay, after discovering these differences, we asked them, now look at a Coca-Cola campaign in Brazil, in South Africa, in Vietnam. Now what do you notice? Because now you see different things and you have the vocabulary to talk about. So what would work and what would not work? What is universal about Coca-Cola and what is culture specific? And to give you an idea of, how to connect these differences. And then finally, you end with a reflection, right? That is, for me, when I teach, I still do COIL projects. I teach only a little bit, intercultural communication, but it's always with a COIL project, and the reflection is always part of the assessment. But sometimes for my partner, it is not. Right? So for them, the reflection is a nice to have. For me, it's a need to have. So some examples that I thought resembled a little bit more the project-based learning approach. One was with Chile and the Netherlands, and in Chile we had a client. It was a Chilean winemaker, a wine producer, that was looking to export into the Netherlands, or well, to Europe, Northern Europe. So the marketing students on the Dutch side, they looked at entry strategies, and they looked at what is the wine selling market look like, and the Chilean business students could help out with the connection to they knew more about what makes Chilean wine so special, and the client gave it sort of an extra urgency, like, oh, it's real wine, and he really has a problem that we need to solve. The second one was not with a Dutch university, but I really like this example. This was nursing students in South Africa and video production students in the United States. And this was about breast cancer awareness. So the students made a video for how to teach women how to do self-examination for early detection for breast cancer. And this video was actually used in South Africa. So after the project ended, the video still, I don't know if it still exists, but this was many years ago. But this is a product that they actually used that helped in villages where, nurses couldn't be around all the time. So they had to learn, of course, what video language, what visual language actually works in South Africa, right? And what is the storytelling tradition? And the storytelling tradition also applies to the third project, which is with my university, again with South Africa. The students in South Africa were studying microbiology, and their course was on water sanitation. And the students in the Netherlands, they were studying marketing, and the course was business English. So for marketing, storytelling is important, right? You can't just sell a product, you need to tell a story about the product, an experience and all that. So the microbiology students lacked the skills to explain why it is so important to have clean water, right? So they knew how to clean water, but not tell the story about it because they were too technical. So together they figured out, and the title of their project is H2O Tales, they figured out how can you tell stories about clean water? For South African audiences, but also for Northern European audiences. So these were some examples that I thought may connect a little bit with your project-based learning. COIL is not only synchronous teaching, so I very seldomly have synchronous moments. Maybe at the beginning, a kickoff, we do an introduction, hey, there they are. Sometimes we're in the classroom, most often everybody is at home and we're on our devices. Because then people can go into breakout rooms and online, like Zoom breakout rooms or Teams, and they can have conversations with one another. Because again, they're not interested in me, they're interested in each other, as they should be, because they will be working together. So the academics explain the assignment, and then the students get to work. So there's some synchronous teaching, maybe somebody's trying to get in. Okay, good. But not always. So you can have a virtual guest lecture. Instead of me explaining Mexican culture, I'd much rather have my colleague from Mexico do it. It's easier to have an academic do a guest lecture than to have the whole classroom, because then time difference becomes an issue. And my Mexican colleague didn't mind, 7 o'clock in the morning, she was dressed only up here. The rest was still pajamas because it was very early for her. But it worked for my class time. Now, to ask a whole group of students to do that is a different thing. So the synchronous also limits maybe your ability to work across time zones. And I do encourage people to work across time zones. Very often academics shy away from that. Oh, but it will be difficult for the student. But they are a fact of life. If they're going to work internationally, they will have to deal with time zones. So it's better they learn now how to manage that. When you schedule an appointment, to always add, like, who's 2 o'clock? My 2 o'clock or your 2 o'clock? And these rookie mistakes we all need to make. My colleagues still make them when they're developing a COIL project with their partner. They still make the mistakes. It makes them excellent coaches, because then they can explain to their students, don't forget. So what it can be embedded, or what it should be, is embedded in a module, not on top of, add on, honors students only, an elective. Make it part of your regular course. In Amsterdam, we're trying to, the ambition is that all students in either year 1 or 2 are able to experience a COIL project. Now, we're an extremely large university, so we're nowhere there yet, but we have shown that we have cohorts of students, sometimes 26 groups, and they all do a COIL project. It's a lot of work, gray hair. Well, I just went to the hairdresser, but it's a lot of work. But once academics have a partner, they often repeat the project. They do it a couple of years. So it's not, it's an investment, but you can scale. The whole reason we do COIL in our university is because our internationalization strategy is to be inclusive. So we want all students to have access to such an experience, and not just the lucky few with a crazy academic who wants to do this, or, but everybody. So when it makes sense in the course, we try to embed a COIL project, so that at least once in their 4 years, they have had an intercultural international experience. It's a collaboration between peers, but across difference. And the difference can be linguistic, geographical, disciplinary, but as long as there's difference. So don't look for partners that are very similar to you. Look for people who are different, right? Very often we're, we teach the same thing, we do research together. Great, but try to find that element of what is different, because otherwise what will happen with Dutch students is, if you and I know the same thing, why don't we split up the tasks? You do that part, I do this part, and then we deliver it as if we did it together. But if you have people who know different things, you need to work together, because I can't do this without you. You know something that I don't, right? So that interdependence is very important. It's a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. Also, the students won't be doing all of the work synchronously online. None of us do. When we collaborate with international partners or for conferences or any type of international project, we use Google Drive, right, for file sharing, or maybe Teams or OneDrive or whatever you use, but we're not always working in the documents or on the materials at the same time. But whenever we have a moment, and then we schedule moments to have a conversation. Students do the same thing, right? So we have to teach them how to work at a distance with a partner. And it's a balance, like I said, between content and process. So it can emerge from existing internationalization activities. That's how COIL really took off in Amsterdam, because we were doing these international collaborations with partners in, for example, in Germany. And the students would visit Germany for a couple of days. We would go to school in Dortmund, and they would be together a couple of days, and then the students would return home, and they would work at a distance together. And I said, that's a COIL, right? Except that the physical part is sort of extra. It's team building, it's getting to know each other, but the rest is a COIL. So from those existing international activities, we put more emphasis on the collaboration that took place online and internationally. It can also sustain activities when mobility isn't possible, and I'm not just talking about the pandemic, because a lot of, especially in leadership, a lot of the mindset has been, oh, thank God that's over. We can focus on mobility again, the real internationalization, right? But the real internationalization is only accessible to, in the Netherlands, 25% of students, which is an extremely high number, by the way. I don't know in Germany what the for international mobility, and I'm talking about students that go for a semester abroad. In my school, it's 10%, 10. So 90% of the students are left out, right? So it can sustain and promote internationalization when mobility isn't possible for a number of other reasons, economic or religious. Or it can induce new internationalization activities, people that have been maybe doing research together that find out, oh, maybe our students could actually do something together. And so new things can grow. And it can definitely, and this is one of the really strong points of international online collaboration, it can engage more people. For example, in a COIL project, you have an academic. You can engage students, by the way. Also, you can engage the industry, clients, or if you want companies that you want to work with. It also involves international office, but it also involves, and I work with the Teaching and Learning Center, because it has to do with curriculum internationalization. So you're involving more people, making internationalization something that we do and not just something that international office does or this one particular professor does, right? When it becomes a we thing, it becomes an ecosystem, and then it can grow. So collaboration across difference, it sounds really ideal and beautiful, and I definitely like it, but it's not without risk. Was it this week? Yeah, I think this week I started a COIL project, and so nothing against Valencia, I love Valencia, but we started a project with a group of students in Valencia, and they were international students. My group of students is predominantly Turkish and Moroccan, because it's an elective, it's a course about business development in Morocco, and that draws a lot of students with a MENA background, Mediterranean and Turkish, Moroccan, for us mostly, background. And an international student from the Valencia group said, I don't really understand, why do I have to work with Turkish people? I don't want to work with Turkish people. And the student on my end was devastated. She was so hurt because, it was a safe space, and I invited her to do this, and the first encounter on WhatsApp is like, your last name sounds Turkish, I don't want to work with Turkish people. So there's risk involved. The professor was mortified. She felt horrible. So we're working on what to do now. But that's, these things happen. I've heard of US students saying, I don't want to work with Mexicans when we develop COIL projects so that there is an intercultural dialogue. They don't become Turkish people, but they become Amir, somebody I know, right? And this guy that I have things in common with, so. COIL, and I think also project-based learning, needs to be inclusive. We need to be intentional in our efforts to make it inclusive. Especially if it's education, we need to think, are all voices heard? So do we intentionally make an effort to include these different perspectives? But also, can they all participate equally? If there are different perspectives and different voices, can they participate? And not just linguistically, like, do they have the linguistic skills to participate, or do I need to support them? Technologically, when we work with South Africa, sometimes that's, bandwidth, load shedding, when there's no electricity at all, when certain apps are not available, or they require a lot of data, so they're too expensive to use, etc., etc. Right? So, can you all participate equally? And how can we support students to collaborate across difference? Because we empathize most with people that look like us. So when we ask students to work with somebody who is very different, how do we help them do that? And intercultural, now it happens to be what I teach, so obviously I find this very important, but if an academic engages in international activities, doesn't mean that they automatically have intercultural mentoring skills. So you don't need to be an intercultural specialist, but you do need to have some intercultural sensitivity. And the beauty of a COIL project is before your students work together, you work together with your international partner because you're developing this project. So you're basically doing like a COIL project before the COIL project. And that's a good opportunity if the academic has reflective skills to think, oh, what was difficult for me? What did I struggle with? And how can I help my students overcome these issues, right? So there's opportunity there, but we need to be mindful. Sometimes we focus so much on the content, the research, that we forget about the process of working across difference, and that sometimes we need to go slower. Or sometimes we can't do it all. We need to select where do we put the emphasis. So why does it matter to be more inclusive? Because COIL has seen an incredible uptake in the Global South. Like I said, in the Netherlands, the Erasmus numbers, the students on mobility is 25%. Do you know what the number is in South America and South Africa? I can take a sip. Any guesses? What would be the number of mobility? Less than 1%. Less than 1%. Even in South America. Chile, I mean, Argentina, kind of, logical right now, but Chile, And for countries like Venezuela, nothing. There's nothing. This is sometimes the only way to connect with abroad. So COIL if you want to learn about innovative practices, probably for project-based learning as well, but also COIL, you have to look at the Global South. That's where it's happening. It's very exciting, right? Now, they do a lot of Spanish to Spanish collaboration because language skills is also sometimes, but you know, there are ways to engage. And there's definitely, if you work with South Africa, they use English as a language of instruction. So innovative COIL comes from the South, but that means that we cannot always use the global North approach. And why is it important, at least for us in Amsterdam, to work with the global South? Because we're actively looking to decolonize our curriculum. We have been active colonizers, and the imprint on curriculum elsewhere, especially in South Africa, is felt. That's why I'm a research fellow in South Africa, to try and contribute a little bit to, you know, learn and to Africanize in their context. They don't talk about internationalizing the curriculum. It's already international, they say, it's colonial. So they talk about transforming the curriculum or Africanizing the curriculum, right? So learning about the practices in the Global South can be of added. I'm going to continue, but wait, yeah, I think picture was taken. So, so I don't know if you're familiar with the term Ubuntu. It's a South African term. Yeah, do you know what it means? It means I am because we are. So if you are in pain, I cannot be happy. So I am because we are. Ubuntu is the spirit of the Ikudu Erasmus project that I'm involved with, which started out, it's a capacity building project. And the tendency may be, well, Global North partners with Global South, we're going to bring capacity to the Global South. So our very first meeting, we said, we're not going to do that. I am because we are. This is the spirit of our project. So that means that we're all learning together. And some may know a little bit about this, and some others may know about something else. And we're putting it together and see how can we do this in a more equitable, inclusive way, which is super hard because universities in Europe are familiar with Erasmus and the deadlines of Erasmus and the language of Erasmus, right? So it is complicated to do that in an inclusive way, but we always try to keep this in mind because, and this is my last slide, something I want to leave you with, also an African proverb. If you want to go fast, you should go alone, by all means. But if you want to go far, go together. And for COIL, that is definitely the way. COIL is a thriving community, COIL Virtual Exchange, I should say. It's a thriving community, it's a co-creative community, because there is no exchange of credits, right? So I teach my students a course, they do a COIL project with somebody else, but I still assess my students. There's no formal legal agreement necessary. So I can work with any kind of university, right? So I can learn from different practices, and others can learn from working with us. And by doing this, we slowly, little by little, internationalize the curriculum. In COIL, it's not about who gets more students. It's not about robbing each other of mobility and international students, because we're doing it as part of how we teach. And I took a colleague with me to a COIL conference, and he said, it is about international, but it doesn't have to be about international. It's a way of thinking about teaching and learning, and it is. It is. It is how you think about how do students learn. And in a COIL project, they do it like in project-based learning. They do it together. They do it working on a problem that they try to solve together, and the professor is the facilitator of that process. So with that, I'm going to open it for questions. I want to thank you very much. And this is my email in case you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Eva Haug in Amsterdam. There's many in Norway, but in Amsterdam, there's only me. So I welcome questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful talk and lecture you gave, and I'm sure there are comments, questions, maybe. To finish my sentence and then.
Thank you very much, Eva, for the presentation. I'm very glad to see you again. I mean, we know each other from some other meetings, and I'm glad again to hear you talking about COIL. But my question is related also because some of the talks that we had yesterday. So I know that COIL, it means to have the learning, but shall we contemplate or also involve in something to get like a product as a final product of that COIL? Like, I don't know, we were talking yesterday, it was one example about calendars, it was project-based learning as well. So could it contemplate as well COIL as a final product to obtain in that learning?
Oh, you mean that the product would be a COIL, or no? Or is in COIL?
If the COIL
Yeah?
will be focused in obtaining a product.
Absolutely. Most are. So when I say learning, I mean learning outcomes, that there's a learning outcome and assessment, right? And that the focus is that students learn something. And that learning often results in a product, and it can be a report, but it's very boring. Very often it's slightly more creative products and outputs. It can be an exhibit, it can be a video production, it can be a website, it can be many things, but ways in which students can demonstrate learning. I've heard of COIL projects where they created music, they made movies together. I mean, right? One group of students writes the score and the other group of students plays the music, and all of these things are possible. So yeah, absolutely. But can you imagine it as well, or do you find it difficult to imagine a product? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate a lot your approach. And I wanted to know how do you plan to work with your colleagues and during the process with the coach, and how do you organize, because it means really to collaborate like teacher. And so and this is one, and the other is the group, how many students in each group, and if you have a big group, you can split in different, but who decides how? And another one is, you said maybe we need more time, or in this case, if something happened that you didn't preview, and you can change the time, you can say instead of 4 weeks, we stay 5 weeks, or otherwise, if you have 12 weeks, you do 2 different projects.
Yes. Yeah. So the last question you answered yourself. Let's see if so how do you get started? When it's your very first COIL project, and if you don't have a coordinator, if you have a coordinator, somebody like me, a COIL dedicated person, or an international office that knows about it, they can help you find a partner. Number one is number one is identifying where in your course would you like to, or which course do you think could be an opportunity. Number two would be to find a partner. And sometimes there's people that can help you with that, but there's also online platforms like, for example, COIL Connect is a free platform where academics, I can't write right now, but COIL Connect is a website and a platform that's been created for people to find, connect and with other partners. And then you start the conversations, and like I said, you do a COIL project with your partner before your students engage in it, because you have an icebreaker, you have to get to know each other, and then you work on what will the students do, and the end product is a COIL project for your students, and then you implement it. And while you're implementing and facilitating, you're both the academics, and I would recommend, if you have never done one, to start with one partner. Some people, can you do it with 3? Of course you can, but you know how complicated that is? Start with one, because it's not just about different people and different courses, academic schedules. Like, when is it summer and when is it winter, and the holidays, and just start with one partner. But you are equal partners. You're equal partners, so you have meetings with your partner, or you check in with each other. How are your students doing? Because the students always complain to their own teacher. This isn't working. So you need to have conversations with each other, like, are they working? Can you see output? And who should we help a little bit more? And then at the end, I always recommend that you assess your own students, but they've worked on a shared product. So you have a conversation about, which products did you like, how did they do? I create a rubric, an assessment rubric together, where we say in the Netherlands it would be this grade, and in the US it would be that grade. So it's very transparent. How big would the student groups be? Well, we have groups of 30 students, and then for COIL project we divide them into groups of 3. I think 4 and 4, 8 is a lot of people to try and make schedule a meeting. So smaller is better, but 1 and 1 is very vulnerable. If one drops out, the other one is left without a partner. So minimum 2, but sometimes it's unequal numbers. I have 30 and they have 60. So there's more international other students than my students. All of these things are possible, and it's all a matter of design. Was that all the questions, or was there, because there were many questions? Oh yeah, if something happens. Yeah, so usually you cannot go longer. That is so very important in COIL. Things happen, earthquakes, strikes. In South Africa, every academic year starts with student strikes. It's supposed to start in February, it never does. So you plan to be flexible, and then it means you maybe have to drop some of the tasks, make the tasks smaller. Because you can't always go longer. Sometimes your course ends. You have a very hard exit. So you need to sort of adjust the workload for the students. Flexible is the word. Yeah, flexible and creative, exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, Eva, for the insight. Davide from University of Palermo in Italy. Couple of quick questions. First, what would be a suggestion for planning the COIL course? Mm-hmm. So which work ahead with the other colleagues? And the other one, whenever you merge COIL and project-based learning, how would you handle assignments? No, it's a big project. You divide the project in small groups. What would you suggest?
Okay. So I would allow, if it's your very first one, if you haven't established a COIL yet with that particular partner, to give yourself a semester. And finding a partner, having those conversations, because, like, for example, South Africa, the Christmas break starts end of November, beginning of December. They're out until almost half January. So I need to start early if I want to do something in February. You know what I mean? So that's, give yourself a semester, but once you have more experience, you can do it quicker. If you know already your COIL partner, you can speed things up a little bit, but the first time for sure. Can it be part of, yeah, I can imagine if a project-based course, right, has, I don't know, 5 credits, then maybe you say, well, 3 of those would be international. But there would also be some tasks or assignments that the students would do locally. That could be the case. It could be the whole thing, but maybe usually your course has learning outcomes that you need to comply with, right? That's been described in a year beforehand, etc., approved by exam committees. So you need to see, how could a COIL contribute? How could I, with an international collaboration, how could I still achieve some of these learning outcomes? And which ones do I absolutely need to do just with my own students? And then sort of creatively, now again, some universities experience more creativity than others. Now very often academics feel that they don't have any freedom, and then I talk to their leadership and they actually do. But it's a perceived amount of freedom to creatively look at your teaching or not. So these are conversations that you have, and it's very good to always also involve leadership, exam committees, curriculum committees, and how do you look at this? And surprising people with a COIL is never a good idea. You don't want to, at the last moment, no, you can't do that. And then your partner's left without a project. So always make sure that if you need approval, to get approval beforehand. I'm lucky in Amsterdam, we are so anarchistic, we can just do a lot that we want. But every now and then, somebody checks, and then we need to make sure that at least we comply with the rules of the learning outcomes. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Päivi from Jyväskylä. Finland. I would like to ask you about these cultural differences. That do you have any good ideas to tackle those challenges that if two countries or persons don't want to work together, are you having experience what works if you still need to collaborate? Thank you.
That's a very good question, and it's a whole different keynote, because it's my area of expertise, so it's very difficult to give a short answer. Now, I want to say it is exceptional that a student would make such xenophobic remarks. It may be a sign of the times that they feel so free to do so. Before, there would be maybe more shame, like, I can't really say that. And now, apparently, they say it. But they might have felt it anyway. But it is an exception. It's not the rule. In general, students are curious about their peers. They have this mindset of, I'm curious about people in other parts of the world, and I want to get to know them. But it is, so there are three aspects in intercultural differences that always play a role and that need to be supported. One is how we build relationships and build confidence. No, not confidence, that's Spanish, sorry. Confianza, sorry? Yeah, exactly, trust building, thank you. How we build trust. That's why icebreakers are so important. Dutch students, they want to work and then they build trust. But that doesn't work with the majority of the world, where they focus more on people. So it's first establishing trust from the heart. I know you, I know what you like, and then we work together. So icebreakers are really important to do that. Communication styles, direct, indirect, you know, that is an issue and an opportunity for learning. And scheduling, time, how we schedule, what is a deadline, how on time is on time. Nothing stresses students out more than when their time orientation is challenged. So that's a really fun learning opportunity. So those three aspects for sure. And then sometimes things like leadership, how we perceive leadership, how we give feedback, all of these collaborative skills. Yeah, it's a big question with a short answer.
Any more comments or questions? It's good for me, then I can ask. I mean, in order to make like COIL, you need kind of like infrastructure to support it, right? COIL coordinators, stakeholders, different universities to collaborate together. But what is your impression in the like nascent phase of like a COIL emerges? People at one university become interested in COIL. Does it make sense to start like bottom up? I mean, if you have like, I don't know, 2 university educators, so like, you really would like to do this because, I don't know, maybe that might be a good idea to do this within the FORTHEM Alliance to get a co-partnership with another university. Yeah. What is your experience? Are these bottom-up approaches helpful in this respect? Or do we have to approach like this via like setting up like a basic infrastructure, like, I don't know, nominating a coordinator?
Yeah. Okay, my answer is very simple. You cannot do COIL without academics. So to me, bottom up is essential. Also, academics can move much quicker than leadership can. There's meetings and decision making and it takes forever. And often they want to see the results before they gamble on something new. In my university, we started bottom up. Actually, I started doing COIL and then I collected evidence, like this is what students think of it. These are some, impressions that they have. This is what we produced. And I presented that to management, but because you can't grow if it remains bottom up. You need top-down support. But the structure often follows the initiative. So yeah, be anarchists, be pirates, and just start doing it. You can start small. But very important, and something I didn't do early enough, is to collect testimonials and things that you can show others. This is what a product would look like. This is what students think of it. So now what convinces management is numbers. Because internationalization is often measured in mobility numbers. So many partners and so many students go abroad. So when I showed them with COIL project, we reached this many students, which is so many times more than the amount of students that would go on mobility. We work with this amount of partners, with so many academics. That's really impressive. So collect the numbers and tell your story. So definitely start bottom up, yeah.
Another question, if you allow, still have some time. It's often mentioned that COIL is like comparably, I don't want to say budget, but like economic way to foster internationalization.
Yeah.
If you compare it, for example, with like a huge international summer school,
Yeah.
3 people from this university, 2 people from this university, is that more kind of like a narrative, or turns out to be actually the case?
Yeah, in my university as well, in the beginning, this unique selling point that others used is COIL is cheap. It doesn't cost anything. That's not true, because it costs time. Academics need to invest time, and time is not something that they have an abundance of. So I think in the beginning, you may, when you're doing your pilot projects, you may invest a little bit, maybe a little bit of a passion project. But that's why the top-down is important. If there are if there's some structural support, organizational support, which could be in finding a partner, or helping you with the technology that you use, collecting evidence after, I don't know, there's things that you can get support for. In my university, I do professional development, so I help academics design it. Say they don't have to, icebreakers, how do I do an icebreaker? Here are some examples. Here are examples of collaborative tasks, and let me give you feedback on your design. That kind of support, because we don't have money to throw at the problem, we're a public university, but sometimes advocating for slightly more generous time allocation. If an academic is developing a new course, give them extra hours to develop a COIL project. So it's not free, but it is more affordable, and it includes more people, and more students benefit from it. So, I mean, but I hate to call it cheap or free. No, that's not the case. And that provoked the question.
And I was thinking maybe it could also be possible to combine like this virtual exchange through COIL with, I don't know, short time mobility.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That would be maybe something interesting for the FORTHEM context, like you plan ahead, and then, I don't know, semester later,
yeah,
you meet in person, but you are much better prepared. Yeah,
for sure. And a blended intensive program, in a way, is a combination, right? It's a sort of a shorter COIL, but there's a mobility aspect connected to it. A lot of universities, though, including mine, abuse the blended intensive schemes to just do the mobility, and the online, the hybrid part or the blended part is an icebreaker, and that's it. And then all the work is done during the mobility. The mobility is real, and that's a real exchange, and anything online is fake and virtual. That narrative is very persistent, in spite of the pandemic, unfortunately. But you can't convince everybody. Little by little, I think COIL is, especially because I think Europe, when we start looking at the global south and the success there, we will become jealous, and why aren't we doing that? And I think that more universities will join, including Germany.
Eva, we all know what icebreakers are for, no? But here they have a particular role. Could you describe a bit more, like why is it needed, and how long is an icebreaker? I mean, it's just one shot, or is like 1 week icebreaker? Mm-hmm. How is planned?
Well, ideally a week, yeah. Sometimes even 2 weeks. So the thing is, icebreakers are important because we're asking students to trust each other, to do some learning, and at the end, because they get credits for it. And most students care a lot about finishing their program and finishing their studies on time, because it's expensive to study, right? So if I need to trust you that together we will actually achieve this task, it is good to get to know each other a little bit. Like, what are your strengths? What are you good at? How will we work together as a team? So that's why they are important. It's also important for students to realize during the icebreaker, what is your lived experience? If you are in South Africa, what do you have access to, and what might be challenging for you? When we have a Zoom meeting, why is your screen always black? right? Because there's not enough bandwidth. So icebreakers are important for that reason. And I recommend, to answer your second question, that you can start it facilitated by the lecturer, but definitely think of activities, tasks that the students can do without you, but then they reflect and they share with you what they've done. And you want an example?
Yeah, like, speed dating.
What? No, because they already are a team. Well, I mean, sorry, that was very derogatory. Yeah, it could be speed dating. I don't do speed dating because it feels very much like a market and like you have to be popular. So what students can do is they can shoot a little video about their daily life. And then afterwards talk about the video, like what did you see, what did you notice, and they can create a video of that. So like a mosaic, this is our team, like introduce your team in a video, or they can create a playlist, a Spotify playlist. These are the songs that tell a story of who we are. They can use Google Maps to map out a tourist tour, like what are the main sites of my city that you should absolutely visit on a budget. They can prepare a meal together and eat it. I mean, but they're online, but then they can exchange recipes. Yeah, exactly. So there's many things you can do. Some things you can do online that you couldn't do in real life, actually. So sometimes people try to mimic an icebreaker that you would do in a classroom and then online. It doesn't work. So you have to really think like online, what could you do? But I encourage to bring in the fact that people are physically somewhere. So use the smells, the sounds, the foods, so that people have an idea like, oh, wait, they're not just on the screen. They are actually somewhere. And they have a physical body and a physical experience. So those kinds of icebreakers. Yeah, you do those? Wonderful.
Comments, questions? Good for me. So there's also nothing coming in from the people following the stream. So allow me one last question. If you read about COIL and you have this like very detailed kind of like flow charts, how to set up a COIL course, like for example John Rubin. So and then in order to COIL you have to do this, and a certain phase covers like 2 to 3 weeks for this and that reason. I was like super curious from a practitioner's point of view, how closely do you stick to this like oil recipes brewed up at SUNY College?
Yeah, no, I don't like them because I think so recipes work in some countries and in others they don't. Sometimes you have the right ingredients and sometimes you don't. So I don't think recipes are very inclusive. It is good. So my basic recipe, and I showed you, it's this icebreaker, a collaborative task, and something that they do together, and a reflection. That's my recipe. That's my recipe. But then it depends. It's a conversation. It's co-creation with your partner. Because if their way of teaching is very different, and you force this recipe down their throat, you know, the students aren't going to be happy, your partner isn't happy, and you might learn a thing or two actually. Oh, we always do it this way, but it might be done differently, it has definitely, since I started doing COIL, and I'd already been teaching for a very long time, and for me it was like a breath of fresh air, because I learned new practices. I actually changed the way I grade, because in the Netherlands we go from 1 to 10. 1 is an absolute fail, and a 10 is perfect. And everything above a 5.5 is approved. So I worked with a Mexican colleague, and she gave 9s and 10s, and I got all nervous, and I had to do some self-reflection, like why? So in the Netherlands, the 8 is like the perfect score for a student, because the 9 is for the professor, and the 10 is for the big guy or big lady upstairs. So and if you give a 10, we have this belief that students won't be motivated to learn anymore. Ludo, I don't know where it comes, but it's a very Dutch thing. So my Mexican student, actually, colleague, opened my mind to that, because she asked me, why is that? And I had no good explanation. So I started changing how I grade. My colleagues are very suspicious. Like, you must be a very bad teacher, because there's no way your students can get a 10. I said, well, yeah, they meet all of the assessment criteria. I cannot justify why it would be lower. right? So yeah, I think no recipe. Throw out the recipe and sort of learn how to cook something different. You like that? Okay, I have a fan. You're welcome. Thank you.
So we are now moving to our next program point, which will be a collaborative